What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Longa Life Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Joe Longa, and I'm super stoked and grateful to have you all here today. Guys, this is round 2 with Ken Pataky. And honestly, the episode kind of just went its own way. We really had an initial plan to discuss manifestation, and as soon as we got on the call, we just continued to talk about what was going on right now with the humanity and ourselves and our own opinions and feelings, and what some of the things that we're doing to deal with some of the influx of controversial and contradicting information that keeps coming in every single day, some of the different techniques both of us have been doing, and just, what we think about everything. So it ended up being a very long conversation, almost 2 hours, so I will keep this intro short. I do want to tell you guys about a new feature that I've added to the podcast, which I'm super excited about and super grateful that Anchor, the platform that I use to do this podcast on, offers this option. You can go in the description if you'd like. It says support podcast here, and if you'd like to make a donation and help out the show, I would really appreciate it. I'd like to get some new features. There's donations anywhere from, I believe, 99 cents a month up to $10 a month. I'm grateful for anything that you are willing to contribute. This is how I make my living, and it's also a way for this podcast to grow on many levels. I'd really like to get video into this podcast. I'd like to get some merchandise, get a newsletter running, a website, so many different things, so I can add more value to your life and give you more information, maybe give you some more content, some video content, and maybe some more interactive content with some of my guests. Excuse me. But yeah, I'm just super excited to give you guys this episode today. It's one of those ones where, again, you just sit back, relax, and enjoy. I mean, if you're on a long drive, maybe to New Hampshire or wherever you live out in the world. I mean, I'm up in Massachusetts, so, a 2-hour drive for me is upstate New Hampshire or Maine, something like that. But wherever you are in the world, if you got a good chunk of time to sit back and chill out and listen to this episode and just hear how two people feel about what's going on right now. Maybe it'll be a little bit as cathartic for you as it was for Ken and I. So, yeah, sit back, relax, chill, take a deep breath. Open up those hearts, open up those minds, and get ready for a wild ride of a conversation with Ken Pataky and myself. That's good. That's good.
I'm doing spectacular.
That's I like that answer. That's a way better answer.
Yeah, man.
I know we're in like the wildest of all get out times, and I know you've been going through a ton of stuff, and with mom, and how's she doing? I know we talked.
Yeah, she's still stable. I mean, she's home and everything. It's just she's having some issues recovering from all the procedures and the medications and everything. She's got some bloating in her stomach, and she's pretty weak. She's not able to eat much. So we'll see. Hopefully she can pull through and all that. So that's,
go ahead.
No, it's more, it's that, and it's all the craziness that you just pointed out. It's never been, I don't remember. They say 1968 was a wacky year because we had a couple assassinations and a major flu at that time. But in Vietnam War and all that.
Right.
But I don't know. I don't remember. I was only 3. So this year is in our faces.
Yeah.
And I certainly don't remember anything as wild as this.
No.
Anywhere. So
nothing that ever seemed so polarizing too. It's such a weird time because it's like so much information, and so it's hard to decipher what is the information to pay attention to. And it's like we've been gifted this time to be able to have all this information, but there's so much with context backing some of the information too, but it's coming from so many directions. It's like, as a human being right now, it's really hard to navigate the plane of like what's actually going on, because I don't know about yourself, I feel like the information is so skewed on both sides that it's almost hard to even go to a side, read the information, and accept it, because as soon as you go to the other side, read the information, it's hard not to accept that one too. And it's like, what the heck is going on, So yeah, it is definitely the most intense of times.
I kind of feel like what guides me is principles, because facts are so, for one thing, they're elusive, as you're pointing out, because the sources are not credible, and the information in some cases is so unbelievable, and there's so much contrast, between the stories. It's almost like the way people used to, remember in the old days when people used to debate the veracity of the Bible, what did Jesus really mean with this passage, or did this really happen, or did Mary Magdalene, was she really his wife, or a prostitute, or what, that used to be a hot topic. Now, not so much,
It's weird.
But again, it was the same situation. You had these dichotomously opposed groups, and you have all this intensity, and you have all these crazy stories on either side. And the principles that guide me, I don't know, are you interested in that?
Yes, I am. 100%.
Okay.
100%. Yeah, that's good.
So I find that, like, principles, if you have these operational principles, it helps sort of sort through some of the information and put it into perspective. Like, one operational principle that you have to accept is that governments don't serve the people in general. Governments were instituted by those in power to stay in power, or those who had a lot of power to get more of it, or to consolidate their power. And the only time that things happen for the benefit of the people is what I would call a concession. There's been enough pressure or enough threat. The people in charge are always weighing the benefit versus the loss. So they're like, if we give the people a little bit more, we'll get a lot more. If that's the case, then they'll do it. If it's not the case, then they won't. And so I think that when you use a principle like that the government exists for its own advantage versus the people's advantage, that helps you, place things into perspective. Like, if a story comes down, does it, how does it do in light of that perspective? Because there's a lot of people out there that basically assume that government's there to protect them, to look out for their best interest, to create a great society, et cetera, et cetera.
Do you think that that's a part of a human's ability to maybe to like defer responsibility for themselves? Do you think that? Yeah, because I mean, the root of the word government, and I might be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure that this, like, the root of the word government is govern is to control, and ment is mind, and like I think that's how we do language taking from other Latin and things like that, and their actual meaning. So control mind, government. Like when you say what you just said, it's like, yeah, this is an entity that's out to survive and protect itself. If we were to look at government as a human, there's a good chance that if it had the opportunity to save itself versus the collective, it's going to try to save itself. That's right. Just like a human would, right?
Well, especially when you move away from, when you look at government, like volunteer versus paid, when you have a system where you have paid professionals, which is where this is their career. They have, like you just said, a lot more investment in preserving, their bread and butter, which is, they have to make you believe that what they're doing is absolutely important and critical, to justify the several $100,000 salaries they get per year, plus the the lifetime benefits after that in terms of healthcare and a proportion of their salary and everything else. So one of the ways that they participate in I've heard this term used and I like it, so I keep using it, the kabuki theater drama.
Yeah.
Like, for one thing they do is they go on the floor and they have these dramatic exchanges. Some of them are better than others at being dramatic. For example, what's her name? AOC. She's really, really good. She could be an actress. She could be in Hollywood. She's really, really good at sort of capturing the emotional current of a situation and capitalizing on that. She's also really good at voting the way she's being told to vote, to support the military budget, to support, anything that basically Trump wants, or that that the Democratic Party is being told to support. And so, they go on the floor, they argue with each other, they take pot shots at each other, and then at the end of the day, they basically high five each other and go out for a beer. Their kids go to the same schools, they attend the same country clubs, they have friendships with each other that are decades long. I mean, there's pictures of Clinton and his wife, hugging and dancing with Trump at nightclubs. They're this illusion that they hold deeply opposite values and that they represent deeply opposite groups of people in this country is just an illusion. Absolutely not. They represent the interests of the ruling class, and they do everything in their power to make sure that ruling class keeps its power.
Like a body, like an entity would.
Yeah. So that's one of the principles, I use, is that whenever you are presented with a story, ask yourself, how does this align with the theory that government exists primarily to propagate its own interests and push its own power and survive and thrive, versus that government is there to protect you and look out for your interests and make sure that you're safe. I mean, safe is a code word. Safe is a code word for power and control. They laugh when they say it. They know that all they have to do is drop that word and people go scurrying like mice into their holes. The massive people, and so they use that word as a way to intimidate, to create, fear, uncertainty, and dread, to flood us, with their propaganda. And
do you think that there's an innate knowledge and an understanding of the power of that fear, and that's why it's utilized so frequently
for millennia?
Yeah. I think
definitely.
we know that. I think we know this intuitively as human beings, that like fear definitely reproduces a somewhat of a subconscious response to things, and I think that when someone knows that there is a subconscious response and that there is a separation from your conscious level of or soul level of thinking once fear is introduced, that these tools and tactics become much more of a it's so hard to talk to people that don't see that there could be a possibility of this being used as a tactic of fear versus actual factual knowledge that's trying to benefit or help people. Like it's hard to it's hard to, like we talked about in the beginning, it's hard to decipher information because it's coming from so many different directions. But I feel like when you really look at it as take the information away and take the feeling that the information produces, it's usually based around creating a sense of fear. So back to the word government, it's a control mind. If you add the fear, you control the mind. It's very interesting that we are experiencing this as a collective, and it's almost like us as the population on the outside of the government are witnessing the shadows of what that whole entity possesses. Because I think even as humans, we possess our own, we're entities, and we possess our own shadow side. And I think the government actually has that shadow side. And I think, to your point, there's a lot of people where they let go of their own thought processes to allow the government to take care of their thinking for them.
Well, it's even beyond that. Government, look back at the MK Ultra experiments in the 60s with the CIA, and they were experiencing with traumatizing people, and then basically they would become their daddy. Like, in other words, when you traumatize someone, you put them in a state of fight or flight, which is very uncomfortable. And so the organism naturally seeks balance by looking for some kind of solution or way out to feel relief. So then the government shows up and offers the relief. They have the whole thing set up, so it's like whether the relief is wear a mask, or whether it's stand 6 feet away from people, or don't come out of your house, or take this vaccine, be an experiment. It doesn't matter. We have the solution. We're going to take care of the problem. They create the problem. They magnify the problem. They turn it into trauma, and then they provide a solution, which the illusion is that the solution is going to solve the problem, of course, and the reality is that it's just going to create more slavery and theft of wealth, which is their ultimate goal.
Why do you think people don't see or choose not to see the somewhat in moments stark evidence of exactly what you just said? Why do you think people
stark evidence? Yeah,
because it can be pretty blatant sometimes, right in front of your face. I mean,
for example, before we have an economic crisis, let's just decide we're going to transfer several $1 trillion over to banks and large corporations as an emergency measure, just in case we have an economic crisis. Then directly after, shut the entire economy down, close down millions of businesses, put 30 or 40 million people on unemployment, throw them $1,000 check, watch them all struggle and suffer. And then when the economy is destroyed, all these rich people and banks can come in and buy everything up and expand their power. Like, that's not obvious.
No, I know. And I think it's so wild. I think there's a population of the human race that doesn't want to believe that this dark energy could exist. That we don't want to believe that this is that humans have this possibility to think and believe this way. And that's why I think you hear the term conspiracy theorist thrown out a lot. Whereas my wife and I, we look at that term, because we don't consider ourselves conspiracy theorists. What I consider myself is a truth seeker. Like I want to dig deeper than what's been handed to me, because I feel like what's been handed to me is going through a filtration system. And if I can find a way to bypass the filtration system and get to see these things before they go through the filter, then I feel like I'm getting the action. It's like a scientist. A scientist wouldn't take a portion of the experiment and just throw it away just because it doesn't fit his model. It's part of what the experiment is. You need the data. So if the data is there, you need to use it. It's so weird how, as this like human race, we see so many people just like discredit things that are coming up that have information. And because it's against what's going on as a collective, and that's hard even to say, because I feel like the collective is starting to divide a little bit, or a lot of it. But I feel like there is a collective population that we just talked about that goes government side. And then there's a group of people that understand that there's a government side, but they also want to dig deeper for themselves and think and like look into these things, this information that's coming up with their own eyes. And once someone discovers something that has a shred of truth to it, if the opposite side of the collective, that's the major side of the collective, the one that pays attention to the government, if that goes against that, all of a sudden it's like, not only is that shunned, but it becomes conspiracy. It becomes fake. It doesn't make sense to me that it would become fake, because in an experiment, it wouldn't be fake. It would be data. It would be data.
You're talking about basically collective denial. That's what you're talking about. So when it's the black sheep, or the what do they call it? The phenomena where you have a group of people ganging up on one.
Oh, Stockholm syndrome type of stuff.
Well, yeah, you could jump to that, but I was just thinking of scapegoating.
Okay, yeah.
So, and the scapegoating is actually a phenomenon. It's a phenomena where a group projects its shadow selves onto a minority or onto a single individual. This can happen in a family. It can happen in a group. It can happen in a community. It can happen in a nation. It happened in Germany in the 1930s. It's a phenomena that it happens in other species as well, but it's not quite to the same level. It's more like sometimes a weak member of a species will be shunned by the other species as a way of sort of, I don't know exactly what it is because I'm not an animal biologist, but it has something to do with, if we shun them, they'll be eaten and we won't. Or maybe it just, threatens the integrity of their species. I'm not exactly sure, but if there's too much of a malformation, or if the behavior of the animal is too far outside the norm of the group, they'll be shunned oftentimes. And it happens also with competition. Like when a young male rises up in a primate group and starts to challenge that he may be attracted to the other females, the other male has to beat him off and send him alone out into the woods.
That's true.
Because he won't share. There can only be one leader. So there's a lot of dynamics that are going on here, but obviously the people in control are threatened by people like you who can see through to the real, like can pull the curtain back on the Wizard of Oz and see the little guy in there pulling all the levers and all that stuff.
Yeah.
They don't want that to be shut. So they want to silence you. So, I mean, one way they can do that is come to your house. And Trump is already using those methods now. He's sending these unmarked goons in vans, that are CBP professionals, to cities like Portland and Seattle, and just jerking people into vans and driving off. Yeah. So that's happening. To your point. And also, the Matrix has learned that it can use people against themselves by tying into this sort of collective denial. In other words, if what you're discovering is something that's so dark that most people can't handle that truth right now, and they'd rather reject it or ignore it or believe there's some happier story, then you're going to be in that group, that scapegoating group, where those people are going to, put their denial onto you and blame you for trying to, tell the truth. And the government knows that. So all it has to do is create a label for you that has a negative connotation, i.e. conspiracy theorist, meaning that you have some kind of, because conspiracy, even though you're just a theorist, it has these huge negative connotations around it, meaning that you are plotting to overthrow something good that's currently happening, like right. The government or the church, or you're a conspiracy theorist. No, I'm just a theorist. I'm just talking about what's going on out there. No, but you're in a conspiracy. No, I'm not in a conspiracy. I'm just studying conspiracies. But it has that same connotation. So it's a really effective way of putting a label on you as a scapegoat. This guy is now, he is fodder for the scapegoating mill. And the media, which is owned by the Matrix, created and popularizes that term as a way of constantly keeping in check those who are speaking the truth. So it's actually truth tellers that are being called conspiracy theorists in a society that is corrupt and run by, the minority for the minority. And that's just propaganda. They've been doing that for thousands of years as well.
So it's interesting that we're experiencing, because I totally agree with that. And I think that there is a lot of that darkness that has been being put under the rug coming up. And then there are people like myself, and I know many other people who are seeking a truth surrounding that, specifically some of these wild, to be perfectly honest with you, Ken, in the beginning, when I saw all this stuff with the human trafficking, I was one of those people who was like, there's no way as a human race we could do this. Like, it just doesn't seem feasible that we have the capability as humans to do this on the scale that it's being claimed that it's being done on. And then all of a sudden evidence comes out that has some stark proof that some
of the top leaders in our society may be involved in this. That is even more shocking, right?
It's really, really, really shocking. And then back to our brief just a second ago, talking about the conspiracy end of this. There's like a fear in humans, and I think all of us know that we have our own little dark sides. No one knows what you think. No one knows what I think. But there are times when there are thoughts that run through my mind that even I think, I can't believe I just thought that. Like, you know, like, wow, that's like a really terrible thought. Like, it's, if you take us as a species and you look at us as like a collective mind, you can't deny that there's a possibility that our collective mind might have a dark side, and that dark side can possibly take action. And I think that that's what's starting to come up as a society. We're starting to see that, like, hey, listen, collectively, we are a giant human like entity in mind. And there are things going on that are not being spoken about. And I think the longer that they weren't spoken about, it's like all of a sudden the pain of them, it's like it's rising to the surface right now. And we're in a real interesting place where there are people who still don't think that any of this stuff is really happening, even though the evidence clearly shows that something is going on. It may be being overplayed in some news outlets and blown up, but there is still something going on. So it's interesting to me that as a collective, back to the government being an entity trying to protect itself, it's interesting to me that we haven't been able to zoom out as a human species and an earthling species and see that, like, we're like self-sabotaging right now. There's like a lot of us that refuse to see the dark side and recognize it and understand that the only way to like dissipate this dark side is to see it with light and free it instead of putting it back underneath the carpet. Because if we put it back underneath the carpet, I think it's going to come back tenfold from what it was this time. And I think we all experience that in karmic lessons throughout our life. I'm sure you've ever had an experience where you've done something and you know you should have done it differently, and then it comes back later in life and does it again, except it's 10 times worse than the last time you had it happen. Yeah. Like, it's funny to me that as a human race, we have all this information now between our cell phones and the internet and everything, like, but we're so quick to just deny these things and swipe them back underneath the carpet like it's not going to come back again. And I think that this is like, we're unfortunate and fortunate enough to be living in a time where I think like the carpet's full and there's too much stuff underneath it, and now stuff is going to bleed out, period.
I'm thinking of the analogy of dirty underpants, you know, like like in the beginning you can kind of go a while, and then it gets worse and worse and worse until finally, imagine being stuck out in the wilderness with one pair of underwear. For the first few days, it would be okay. But after like a week, it would be really, really not okay. And then after like a month, it would be really disgusting. You know, I mean, even before a month, you know, so like, like you, after a while, you either would have to, you know, throw them away and say, I'm just going without, or you'd have to find a way to clean them. Right. And so that's what's happening right now. We're realizing how dirty and nasty our underpants really are. And to your point, there's such an entity called the dark web that I have never gone on, but I've known about it for at least a decade. And it absolutely reflects that shadow side of humanity that you're just talking about. It's a complete compository of the sex trade and the slavery trade and child abuse and the most debased forms of pornography, and probably a lot of financial transactions, you know, that are going on behind the scenes, and probably a lot of involvement by some upper echelons in our society as well. And they use the, again, because it's been labeled as this dark, evil thing, you know, people like you and I may not want to experiment with it because we're afraid of what we're going to get ourselves into. I mean, maybe the FBI are going to show up at our house, or maybe we're going to get branded as being like, you know, child sex pornographers, and our whole careers and lives are going to be ended. So don't even go there. Don't even, you know, so that's to their advantage to keep out the truth seekers and the light bringers, because then they can keep doing their dirty business in the corners. And did you know, I Googled the other day, I was talking to someone about slavery, and I thought, you know what, I'm talking without knowledge here. Let me go ahead and just Google slavery. Did you know there's 30 million slaves right now in the world, at least, like documented? Yeah, what? 30 million slaves. Whoa. And they actually have it by country. You can go look it up and see what countries have the most slaves now. I don't know if this is legal or illegal or what, but with that amount of slaves in the world, there's plenty of ways to hide a black market slavery trade that's going on even in a legit first world developed nation. When you have that kind of thing, and when you can lose yourself. I mean, for example, I think India has maybe 8 or 10 million of them, of the slaves. So if you can get people over there, there's a market to buy and sell. So you just have to figure out a way to smuggle people out of their their communities. Typically young people, typically that are not old enough to defend themselves. And they grow them up as slaves. But not only, I mean, women get stolen too, mostly women and children. I had no idea that it was so big.
Me neither. And it's, I wonder, because I do believe in the idea that duality allows us to, it's like, I feel like it's like the reason we came here as like humans and took birth as human bodies is to, duality gives us the experience of being able to feel light because there is dark, being able to feel dark because there is light. So it's hard to think of like a utopian style society where none of the darkness exists. But I feel like there's a way that we can utilize I feel like we're in like this place where we're little kids that don't realize how to negotiate an argument. So instead of negotiating the argument, it's just like little kids beating the crap out of one another, hoping that a result happens. But really in the end, it's just two people that get the shit kicked out of one another and no one really gets anything out of it. Whereas if we were to be able to be adult about some of these situations and realize that there is darkness, like it's here, it's going to be here and there's a reason for it. Can we work together now and have conversations? So basically what I'm getting at is, do you think that there is a place where we can get to as a human race where we can actually begin to conversate about these things instead of continue to swipe them under the rug and not pay attention to them? Do you think that there's a place where we will actually be able to grow up as a human race and sit down and have non-egoic driven conversations about this?
Well, I think that your question is really in two parts because, or really it's, let me just rephrase it. Will people in power ever be able to sit down and have those conversations?
Yes.
Because people who are not in power, a la you and I, are having that conversation right now.
Right.
So some humans are having the conversation. It's just that they're not the ones that are controlling the resources and making the laws and have the armies and such. Because if that could happen, imagine what we could do as a race. Imagine if every single political leader was not corrupt and was actually there to do their job. Slavery would disappear, wars would disappear, genocide would disappear, mass extortion and exploitation of the population would disappear, corporate control of everything would disappear. Things would start to make sense. Police brutality would disappear. Armies would shrink. Countries would become like Costa Rica. Costa Rica, not only do they not have an army, but they're deciding, they're planning to go carbon neutral by next year.
No way.
I don't know.
My wife and I have been talking about moving to Costa Rica, so it's so ironic that you're talking
about
this.
Yeah, me too. That's on my short list of candidates, believe me. And the happiness factor there, the health factor, the environment, but it's a forward-thinking government as well. Now they have the luxury of being smaller, so they can make big changes, more easily than a 350 million, person nation like ourselves. But that being said, that's just another excuse for those in power, So will those in power ever be able to, actually represent people in a way with integrity. You know, I think one question behind that is who's really in power, because the illusion is that the government is in power, and they're actually not.
Right.
They're just have you seen the Matrix trilogy? So they're agents in the Matrix. They're highly paid, specialized agents that have been given more control than the average person and more power than the average person to execute the will of the Matrix. But the Matrix is behind them. The Matrix is actually a small cabal. And when I say small, I mean relative to the world population. There may be a few thousand of them out there that are the most powerful people in the world, if you count every single country.
Right.
You know, but this cabal is mostly made up of very, very wealthy bankers and corporate leaders. Even corporate leaders, you know, are really just agents in the Matrix. I guess I should say more like corporate owners. You know, if you look behind certain corporations and you look at the majority owners of those corporations, which, believe it or not, a lot of these families and the people that participate in this, their holdings are primarily in private corporations that are not public. So you can't trace very easily the ownership and the wealth that they have. Again, they're extremely sophisticated in doing this. The Rothschilds have been around since the 1700s, and they, before the rise of technology, before the Industrial Revolution, before the information age, they were there. So they played those systems to their advantage the whole way. And they know, for example, the reason why, one of the arguments about how you know the media works for them is they never talk about them. They're being told not to talk or report on, you know, these wealthy. You don't hear. When's the last time you saw an article about George Soros or the Rothschilds?
Never.
You know, it's never. It's like never. You have to dig back and dig back and dig back, and then you find like some Wikipedia article or something, and you're like, shit, like what, you know, when was the last, or the Rockefellers, you know?
Yeah.
And if you do hear about the Rockefellers or any of these people, it's always, you'll always hear about the what's the word when you donate money?
It's like philanthropic. Yeah, they did all
philanthropic efforts. Yeah. You know, that's what you'll hear about. You won't hear about their business holdings or the negotiations that they're making in the background to buy this or that corporation, or the relationship they have with certain banks. And you hear almost, when do you ever hear banking news? Unless a bank is going under,
right?
You know, or there's a big scam that the Matrix has agreed. You know, like the banking, like what happened in 2008, it couldn't be hidden. Plus, they needed to create a story where they could get a massive wealth transfer, you know, and get away with it. So they allowed this story. They picked a scapegoat. They picked a group of individuals that were going to take the fall. They didn't take the fall. They knew what was going to happen, and they pulled out their holdings right before the announcement and right before, you know, the crash. Again, pulled all their holdings out, held them, caused the crash. Prices drop, interest rates drop. They go in with all their wealth, and now all of a sudden their wealth is magnified by a gajillion, and they can buy up much more than they could before, because the value of their dollar before a crash goes way up because it's a pre-crash value. And then when the dollar crashes, you know, they do this. They do this periodically.
It's just like people who it's the name of the movie, The Big Short. It's just the shorting of, it's like it's playing the game. You're shorting I don't even know how to say what you'd be shorting, but you're basically
shorting the entire American public.
Yeah, like basically so you're shorting the integrity. Right.
Yeah.
So
that's the thing. So greedy people who specialize in greed, power, wealth, exploitation, violence, aggression, they're all sociopathic. And you have a sociopathic cabal that's running the world right now. And so to your question, will that sociopathic cabal somehow discover its own conscience or it has a conscience, but the conscience has no love or compassion for the human race or the world. It's a short game for them. It's can I amass as much wealth and power in my lifetime as possible, even though I can't take it all with me, which is the insanity of what they're doing.
Right.
Maybe they have some belief that they're contributing to that their contribution to the cabal is somehow worthwhile. It's an army that they're fighting for. They feel like they're knights in an army fighting for a noble cause, and their noble cause is to perpetuate the cabal's power and hegemony over the earth, and that's their legacy, and they're happy with that. Like they're cool with that.
Do you think it's because they've never been shown the other side of what it could be like if that wasn't the case? Or do you think
that the cabal preys on unhealthy individuals, mentally unhealthy individuals who have either been traumatized in some way, and therefore lack the normal human responses that most humans have, a sense of compassion, a sense of wanting to help others that are in need, a sense of like guilt when you do something that's harmful to others. That's missing in them, or it's been trained out of them because so many of these people have been filtered through the military, or they were raised that way by their cabal families to believe that from early childhood, much like the slave trade, that their existence, that their purpose was to serve this cabal. And, they were exposed to really powerful people with really prestigious credentials. And as a child, you don't know jack shit, right? You're being introduced to generals and
it seems normal
politicians, right? And corporate owners. And you're being told the same story by all of them that, hey, we're all in the same club. We rule the world. This is how we do it. You're special. You're one of us. You're going to have wealth. You're going to have power. You're going to have everything you want. And all you have to do is just do what we fucking say.
Yeah. Stick with us.
Always.
Yeah.
And if you don't do what we fucking say, all of a sudden your little biplane or your little single engine that's flying over the sound just somehow just does a nosedive right to the middle of Long Island Sound. It's just going to happen.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you're Kennedy's son.
And it's like you said, like we talked about earlier, that may seem like conspiracy theory to people. It may seem like a conspiracy, but when you look evidentially, what some of these people were talking about before they magically die, it's like, whoa, that's odd. That's awfully coincidental that that person just happened to kick the bucket right after they were about to expose something that was pretty bad, and it could take down the powers that be.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to get a little esoteric right here, but I think at this place and time we are in, esoteric is like the place I think that we have to go in order to start opening the gates in people's minds. So I'm thinking to myself recently, in light of everything that we just said, I think that there may be, and I thought that the corona was going to be that thing because it didn't look like us. You can't see it. You can't smell it. You can't taste it. In the beginning, it was threatening to take out the whole world. So mentality-wise, you would think for the first time as a human race, we would look at ourselves as an earthling population, as like a human race or an earthling population. That's my favorite way to say it. And it might bring us together. So, and it didn't at all. It did for maybe a second, just like 9/11 did for a short period of time, brings us together. Now, this is where it gets esoteric. I'm thinking to myself that if something came here, and I hate using the word extraterrestrial because that throws people to a whole different realm of thought that kind of discredits anything I'm about to say. But if something came here that was somewhat extraterrestrial, that it didn't bleed the blood that we bleed, it didn't use the mechanisms that we use to live, i.e. oxygen, all these things. It literally was something that didn't require Earth to live, but it came here and wanted us, wanted everything that we got, and said, we're going to take it, whether you like it or not. Do you think for the first time that may be the moment where we finally look at everyone as an Earthling and we see us as this thing, Earth, as our spaceship? And that we might actually finally get like the movie Independence Day, when all of a sudden all the countries that had never, like Iran's talking to America, like, hey, buddy, we need help. This thing's going to kill us. Like, let's get together. Do you think that that's a possibility for us? Not saying that aliens are going to come here, but if something of
extreme non-likeness to us, just total opposite were to come in, do you think we would finally see ourselves as Earthlings?
It's funny, when you were starting to introduce your question, I thought you were going to go down a different road. You started talking about esoteric, and then you started talking about an alien race. What I thought you were going to start talking about was the theory that an alien race has been here for several thousands of years, and that co-opted the human race, a la the pyramids of Egypt. You know, like how do you?
And we can go there because I have.
How do you move 10,000-pound blocks of stone at that quantity at that time in human history? You know,
without the sophistication. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, unless you have a slave situation that's I think you have to imagine the only way that could happen is if you can imagine hundreds of thousands of slaves, like oceans of slaves.
Oceans of people,
you know,
yes.
That were being ruled over by this very small cabal, again, but the cabal was humans, but they had absolute power over these slaves, and they were literally, you know, burying them where they fell, throwing them into the pit, and, you know, whatever. Like, if you can imagine that was the truth, then maybe you might be able to imagine how you could coordinate that much labor. And they took many years to build. It was, you know, was it decades, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a long time. Most of them took long times to build.
And they whipped it off in a year or anything like that.
Yeah. And I think at that point, we'd all have to starting to think about how that might have actually happened, because there are blocks the size of houses that are cut to precision that we can't emulate today. Like we cannot build those things today the way they were built back then.
Yeah.
For me, that says something to where we've like lost a bit of consciousness. We've lost connection with something that was feeding us a totally different kind of information, a totally different kind of power that we have as humans.
Right. Yeah, we evolved organically from the earth, and we were in tune with the earth. Even up till a few hundred years ago, we lived a life that was much closer to the earth's rhythms and the earth's energies and the earth's technologies. And we had to know about things like herbs because we didn't have pharmaceuticals, and we had to know about energy and the sun and the way that seasons worked and all of that. You know, what animals, you know, needed to live, and what plants, you know, were good for us and not good for us. We had to know all this information, and that's all been disposed of in the last 50 to 100 years. We've literally thrown away so much of our heritage, and so the possibility that this project could have happened 3,000 years ago seems overwhelmingly impossible to us today, because we just don't even have, like you said, some of the basic knowledge that these people had at the time. So it's possible that it was not an extraterrestrial event, that it was just that they had a tremendous amount of
connection.
Yeah, when you start looking at the pyramids, how they were shaped and how they were aligned, and that they actually reflect, you know, star patterns and things like that. It's crazy. But back to your original question, which was, you know, could there be an extraterrestrial event that brought the whole human race together, or could there be a global catastrophe so great that it could bring the human race together? It's possible. I agree this wasn't it, because actually what turned out was that this wasn't a global catastrophe. The global catastrophe part of this whole COVID-19 situation, I will not call it a pandemic, because it is absolutely not a pandemic. That's a complete lie. It doesn't raise anywhere close to 3% of the population that are dying. I mean, it's far less than 1%. It's way down there in the flu category.
Yeah, so it's like 0.005 or it's really low.
0.1, something like that. Yeah. It's basically another flu that they just used. Again, they just used this to milk, you know, money and power out of the population. So that was the catastrophe. And so the catastrophe itself wasn't great enough. It wasn't a real enough threat. And essentially the governments were in on it. So the governments weren't going to coordinate and change their relationships, because they knew what was going on. They're agents in the matrix. So they're being given, they're not being given all the information, right? Because it's a very military system. It's need to know. So they're given, you know, what they need to do their jobs, but they're given a lot more information than we are.
Right.
You know, there's stuff that goes on that's just insane. But they're also under control. They're dogs on a leash. Like, for example, this comes to my mind. I recently learned that when the president of the United States takes office after the glorious ceremony on the steps of the Capitol, then the shadow side comes out. They're introduced to the basement, to the tunnels, to the escape system, to the Secret Service, and how the Secret Service are going to watch them masturbate and have sex now for the next 4 years, and more importantly, during the first week of office, they're going to actually discuss their funeral plans and how they would like their funeral to be. Yes, because just in case they're somehow incapacitated, assassinated, or they have a heart attack randomly. There has to be a contingency plan immediately in place. So your first week of office, you're discussing the transition of power and your funeral. So, i.e., the Matrix is jerking their chain, saying you're still a dog on the chain. Like, yeah, you have more power now than most Americans, but you still work for us. And don't ever forget it. We have darts that we can shoot at you that could potentially cause, you know, a cardiac event. And we definitely can give you cancer. So don't fucking think that you work for yourself.
Yeah.
So
wild, man. Like, what a... So, because when I say like what I said a minute ago about something coming here and waking us up to the idea that like this is our only place to be, like this is it, this is all we got. Like I think as a human race we have this weird thought that like because we can take stuff from Earth and alchemize it into things that are what seemingly are not from the Earth, that we suddenly have this like superiority complex to this place, and that. Yeah, sure. If shit just starts going wrong here, we're just going to hop ourselves in a rocket and we'll go live on Mars.
Right. Like we have this illusion, number one, that we have mastered nature, when that's actually a ridiculous lie, and we're destroying our planet. We have another huge illusion that we're the only species in the universe somehow.
Yeah.
And that the universe is so small that it basically wraps itself around our planet. You know, we have all these incredibly childish illusions that really, if we didn't have those illusions, our whole lives would be different. Imagine, you know, there's a phenomenon when people live on an island, they become a lot more conservation minded and a lot more, you know, concerned about their garbage, for example, and the energy that they're going to need to survive, and their food supply, because they're on an island. And so like you don't have an unlimited area that you can dump garbage into until it starts coming into your yard. You don't have an unlimited, you know, food supply because you have literally water all around you. And, you know, you have to develop supply chains and supply lines in order to get the things you need that you can't make on the island if you need them. And then you have to establish diplomacy and good relations because you can't just go and get the stuff yourself, you know. And so there's a whole different mentality of island living that, you know, if we actually thought about it for a moment, the Earth is an island.
Yes.
You know, and if we had this idea that the Earth was just a big island that has a finite amount of volume on it, it has a finite amount of garbage that it can handle, it has a finite amount of resources that can be expended. And ultimately, if we trash this planet, we don't really have anywhere else to go. We don't have the technology to move massive amounts of people anywhere that's not just a big pile of sandy rock.
With no oxygen.
The moon doesn't even have an atmosphere.
Right.
So it's literally just a rock floating in space. It's really unlivable unless we create pods on it. And the pods are going to have to be completely self-sustainable from the inside. So why don't we just create those pods on the Earth? Like, what's the value of going up to the moon and creating a pod?
And what kind of life would that be? What kind of...
Yeah.
What we are built...
Talking about quarantine.
God almighty, man.
We're never built, go outside ever.
Never. And like, I think this is another thing that I've been really trying to bring to people's awareness lately, is that like, we are built from the same exact stuff that the thing we live on is made of. Like there's a synergistic
Stardust.
relationship. Yes, there's a massive synergistic relationship. And like, I think that there's a loss of this, like we just talked about a few minutes ago. There's this connection space that's been lost over time with nature. And there are people out there that have reestablished this connection. They're like usually permaculture farmers and people like that who have spent time, and they actually watch nature, and they watch how nature can take care of the problems, and they work with nature to make everything work correctly versus trying to make nature work for them, like how most of our farming techniques do. So if we think about it as a distraction base, like you look back when the Egyptians 3,000 years ago weren't distracted like we were. So their ability to actually be connected to the stars, the earth and all that was a little bit higher than we are, because we have everything. We got TVs, we got cell phones, we got entertainment, music, all these things that are distracting us from our tying into this earth. But then you move on an island, like you say. And once you're on this island, all of a sudden now, yeah, you still may have all the technology, but your land mass shrinks. So even though you're distracted now, you have this like weird subconscious knowing that, okay, yeah, I may be distracted, but like there is a point in time when this stuff can start filtering into my experience.
Where I don't have any space to put my garbage anymore.
Bingo.
Like literally, there's nowhere to put it. I can't just put it on a truck and they drive off and never come back. Like they're going to start rejecting our garbage, which is happening.
That's exactly what I was just about to say.
Yeah, America's garbage distributors are rejecting our garbage now, literally. I mean, just like countries are not allowing Americans to come visit there now.
Yes.
You know, the countries are also like China and other countries are saying, no, we have too much garbage. We don't need any of yours. Take it back. They're sending the shipments back. Like, where do you put them? You know, like take it back.
Yeah. So like in light of all this, because I feel like what we're having a conversation about here is it's deeper than just, you know, the problems of everything, because we could talk about that, I'm sure, forever. But there's got to be a point in time where I feel like we start seeing the forest for the trees. And I mean, maybe that's what this whole deal is all about, and that we're just like 25, 30 years from now, we'll be looking in the rearview mirror going, wow, all that stuff happened to like wake us up as a human population. But then there is the part of me that has to look at the people in the world that are still very much not awake to what we just talked about, like the trash,
not heading in that direction,
and not heading that direction, and not only not heading in that direction, but think that it's actually
fighting against it.
Yeah, they think that it's stupid, that like we're some sort of wild, like overthought thing. My concern is this: is that at some point in time, they're gonna be the people on the island where the trash no longer is being taken out and it's actually in their backyard. Oh, do you think we're going to get to that place where it may not need to be the alien race that comes and wipe us out, or the asteroid, but we may just like wipe ourselves out just real slow?
Well, I definitely think that there is a potential for the human race to extinguish a large percentage of itself due to either some kind of a war that breaks out or some kind of a viral event.
Mm-hmm.
As the human population's immune system gets weaker and weaker, and as we continue to exploit animals in mass quantities for our food that generate these diseases as a sort of Montezuma's revenge, if you will. You know, that's one way it could happen. War is another way it could happen. Pollution of the earth to the extent that it becomes unlivable to live here. There could be a number of those things happening. The global warming thing is a real issue as well. So I believe that the globe is warming. I think it's hard not to believe that if you even read a little bit of science. But then people make the jump that global warming is 100% a result of human behavior. And I don't think that. I do think that we have a tremendous impact on it, though. But I also think it's kind of like let's say you play basketball. You know, you could work really hard to improve your jump shot to where your feet could come 3 feet off the ground. You're not going to jump as high to where your feet are 10 feet off the ground.
Right.
It doesn't matter how hard you train. You'll never jump that high. Right. So kind of like with the earth, like there's the way that the earth interacts with the sun. And then there's the way that we interact with the earth. We can't control the first relationship, but we can control the second relationship. We can care for the earth to make it the most resilient to its relationship to the sun. But we can't change. Like if solar flares come up and there's a pattern of solar flares over certain years that elevates the whole solar system's temperature, we can't control that.
Right.
But all we can control is how resilient the earth is going to be, you know, and by damaging the atmosphere like we're doing, and by increasing the greenhouse effect, by putting more CO2 and methane and stuff into the atmosphere, you know, we're basically cooking ourselves, you know, we're creating the greenhouse effect by creating, you know, this increasing the thickness of this,
like an incubator. It's like,
exactly. So we can definitely have a significant impact on it. And the hard part is determining how much of the melting of the glaciers, et cetera, how much of it is related to human behavior, which I have no doubt much of it is.
Some of it is. Yeah. It's just like we're cyclical beings. The earth is cyclical. I mean, we go through a cyclical phase as humans. Like we shed skin, we grow, our hair colors change as we get older. All these things happen on a cyclical basis, but we can influence how fast some of these, let's use the aging, the aging aspect. We can influence how fast that is by how we take care of ourselves. So as a human race, it's funny because you look at things like in the Bible, and it's like that is, we were recreated in the image. If you look at everything, it's all created in an image, in an image, in an image, in an image, in an image. Like we just keep recreating with like similarities all the way through. So if we go all the way back to the fact that like the earth itself is like a human, and we've like abused it. Like we're just like this college kid, like funneling beers every single night and then eating pizza, like at 9:30 in the morning, and then like going out and having steak and cheese subs, and then like drinking again, and then maybe doing a bunch of drugs on the weekend. And then like all of a sudden you hope that, well, I still should be able to like go play some football this weekend to go shoot some hoops. But then you find out that I can't because I just abused the living shit out of myself. Granted, I might age in 35 years from now. It might be difficult to go play the basketball, that football, any of that. But I'm still young, and because I treated myself like crap for the last 3 weeks, I can't do that now. I feel like if we look at the earth that way, then we can see that, yes, cyclically, even if we weren't here, I feel like the earth would go through its own cycles of warming and cooling and changing.
Because the ice age, we had barely a footprint at that time, but the ice age happened, right?
Right.
So like, so there's gonna be changes that happen, but does that mean we just ignore our role or we just act irresponsibly? Absolutely not. If we work together as a human race, we could mitigate the impact of these changes.
We could eat healthier as a human race. Like with the earth, we could look at the earth as a human and feed it better food. Give it some exercise. If the whole
earth was covered with fruit trees rather than open fields, barren fields of grass, that are being sprayed with a million chemicals, and that 70 billion animals a year are being slaughtered for food. That's 70 billion voices that are screaming up to the heavens, and it's mostly for convenience and pleasure and I don't know what you want to call it, addiction. It's not because you need to eat that food. It's just because that's what you were raised on. That's another lie. Yeah, and you look at the way the Matrix is designed, and we could talk about health. Like the Matrix, you're a battery. So you're only as good as like your charging cycle. When your charging cycle starts to get shorter and shorter, and when you start to hold less and less of a charge, what happens? eventually you take that rechargeable battery and you throw it away because you're like, man, it can only hold a charge for like 30 minutes and it takes me, hours to charge it. I'll just get a new one. I'll get a brand new one that can hold a charge for 8 hours. Then I only have to charge it the same amount. Yeah, I'm losing a little money by throwing it away, but I mean, the fact is I can't really get much out of it anymore. That's what you become when you become 65. You are a disposable battery. At 65, you're no longer making income. You're no longer paying into the taxation system. They have to pay you a stipend every month. They have to pay for your medical care. You're extremely expensive. And because you're so sick and unhealthy, because that's how it's designed, it is very expensive to support you at that point. In-home health care, surgeries, expensive medications, et cetera, et cetera. So, you are designed to expire at that time. So that's why they're pumping so much money into propping up the meat and dairy and grain industries and almost $0 into the fruit and vegetables industry. Fruit and vegetables are the liberation of humanity, especially fruit. Because, I mean, it takes a lot of labor to plant vegetables and harvest vegetables. But if you plant one fruit tree, it can feed you and many people for many years. And you don't have to do jack shit except make sure the tree doesn't get cut down. It's the liberation of humanity to discover this diet. And some of the wisest, greenest people on the earth have in fact discovered a diet. Or if they do eat animal products, it's very sparingly, and it's like the American Indian way. They worship it and they
nose to tail.
They honor it and they use every part of it, and they're very ecologically minded.
Which I think at this point in time, I think we could use the Native Americans as a wonderful platform for understanding how to be very communal in our decision, not just communal with people, but communal with Earth. Because even in Native American tribes, like they would all sit down in the teepee, pass the pipe around, and conversate. There was nothing that was not allowed to be talked about. We're going to talk about it. All of it. Good, bad, ugly. And there'll be every opinion.
They had their shadow side was out there. Like they had a limited shadow side. In fact, they knew about the shadow side. And that's what coming of age meant. When you found your spirit animal and you sat out in the wilderness surrounded by stones in a circle for days and you went through sweat lodge, that was for you to discover your shadow side and bring all your full potential to light so that you could enter society as a fully empowered human being. And they were the ultimate socialist society and they were the ultimate green society. They knew that there was a relationship. They fostered that relationship with each other, who they called the people. If you were an Indian, you were called the people, which means you had all the rights of everyone else in that tribe. You were a sacred being in a way. And they treated animals as sacred beings as well, and the earth as well. The earth had spirits and energy in it, and the water and the earth, and they talked to it and they communicated with it. It was not just American Indians, every primitive race.
So yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that it's funny because to say it just like that, primitive race. I feel like we have deviated so far away from that this is the wake up call. This is
just calling them primitive is the same thing as calling us conspiracy theorists. That was another artifice by civilization to convince people that this was who would want to be primitive, who would want to be embarrassed to be running around their backyard, with their loincloth on, hunting and fishing and harvesting their own food. That's so primitive. No, we wouldn't want to do that. We want to use utensils and doilies and sit around a table in a very,
proper,
stiff way, holding something up our ass, by squeezing our butt cheeks while we eat it, and only using the proper utensil for the proper thing and all these ridiculous, stupid rules that have nothing to do with life or living or the earth.
Oh my God, yes.
But we bought that.
We bought it.
We bought it because it was just a verbal propaganda primitive. These primitive societies, by the way, that knew so much more than we did and lived so much healthier lives and were so more free than we were, even though they were in a society that had rules and certain expectations. I mean, they I don't know. You can't say they were being manipulated and exploited and lied to in the same way that Americans
No, it
today
very
are.
much seems like there was no hierarchy, and there was just like an understanding that, hey, listen, like this entity works together, and if we work together, we live together. If one piece decides to jump out become a cog in the machine, it could kill the machine. It could kill the whole thing that makes this whole thing operate. And it's funny, I think that we've gotten so large as a human population that we've allowed those little cogs to happen a lot. And we're in a place right now where there's many more cogs on the machine than there actually is the machine running. Yeah. That is like, this is the breakdown. And like, as a human race, we are given this opportunity right now. If we're aware enough, we're given the opportunity right now, to rebuild all of this and like really start like taking a deep dive and a look and like, okay, we're a human population. We're an earthling race. This thing we live on is our home. We work synergistically with it. Okay, like let's really start like dialing everything back a little bit, and like let's stop thinking that we've got this all figured out and come back to like learning a little bit more. So as terrible as everything is right now with the bad things happening, I honestly think at the same time it's like it's the darkness coming up to a point where we are being forced to be the light. There are people being forced to like, I have to shine this light. I have to show that there is a possibility to live other than this. So it's like people like you and I who are willing to step out and say that, yeah, there's other ways you can take care of things. There's other ways you can eat. You don't have to go to pharmaceuticals right away. Try this instead. And I hope in the future that people like you and I aren't considered the conspiracy theorist or hippies or whatever the connotations that have been dropped on the people who have decided to deviate from the system and realize that we're just trying to get back to that primitive way of living, that I like to call it the synergistic way of living with our planet. Like, yeah, the synergistic.
No, I think that's definitely. I think we have to take it up a notch too as light bearers. I think that I live a very comfortable life in a beautiful suburban area. I've crafted this life for myself over 20 years. I mean, it didn't start out this way, but I gradually kept liberating myself from one of another system of control to where I feel like, compared to most Americans, I have a more ideal life. But it's not ideal. I mean, there are issues with it, and there are limitations because I do live in suburban America, and I have to be subject to. I'm not allowed to have solar panels on my roof because the power company won't allow it. And I can't grow enough of my own food in my yard to survive on. And the climate doesn't support it year round. I mean, unless I went into greenhousing, I guess I could do that, but it would be a lot of labor. My neighbors, are not like me and already think I'm a whack job. And, going down that road would make that even worse. I need more space, around me. And I think that people need to. I think what we need to do is put our money where our mouth is, and eventually get to a point where we're living the way we're advertising to people that they should consider living. So we have to go to, if we think permaculture, or hydroponics, or fruitarianism or nutritarianism is the optimal way to live, then we have to be living that way. And that not only means, making changes in our routines, still living in suburbia, but it might mean going off the grid ultimately and having our own, building our own community with like-minded light bearers, and then bringing others there, or at least recording it and sharing with them worldwide, what we're doing. I think ultimately that's the inspiration that's going to move people when they see that you actually did it, instead of just talking about it. So I'm in the process of doing that. I struggle with the pace of it. Sometimes I feel like I just want to pull out the roots and go today.
I know that feeling. I know that feeling like very well.
Not quite ready yet. Like if I just had a few more years to pay off my debt and a few more years to, get this and that done, it would be ideal. But then again, what is ideal? Like, who knows when we're going to have a societal wide catastrophe that's even bigger than this and more real? And do I want to be here when that happens, or do I want to be somewhere else? So I think if nothing else, I almost said pandemic. See that?
Yeah.
See the control they have.
Programming.
This situation that we have is, and I just a point on that. Like I really, if nothing else, to take away from this for people that are watching this or listening to this, like be careful of the words you use and be careful of the way you even define the situation.
Yes.
Because if you're using their words, then they control you already. You have to use words that come from a more objective place, from a top-down view that you were referring to, and looking at the whole things like at God's, like God would look at it, or an extraterrestrial would look at it coming in, like what's this species here and what are they doing, like as opposed to like automatically using the word pandemic, because that's the word that's being thrown around by the majority of people. So that being said, hopefully this situation will continue to push light bearers to work even harder to and smarter, not just harder, but smarter to bring their message worldwide and to live the lives that they believe need to be lived, to be the example. Because being the example, again, if I were 300 pounds right now and I were talking to you about health, you'd be looking at me like, dude, really?
Yeah. So they're smoking a cigarette, like, listen, for your health.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like we need to really be concerned about the future of the planet's health. But did you just say that? Like, really? And so, we have to be the example as well as teach the example. And we have to, this kind of thing is so important too, because people like you and I, like how can I say this? We're at high risk of being really isolated, and feeling, lonely or alone or disempowered because we're the only voice in the common circles that we associate with, our neighbors, our colleagues, our families, who just don't see what we see, and they make us out to be the oddball. And again, the whole scapegoating thing and the group denial thing. So we have to connect with each other so we can validate. I'm not fucking crazy, right? Like I'm really not crazy, right? Like
I'm not the only one thinking this stuff, right?
Right. I'm not the only one that I know that's thinking this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like it's really important. And it's not only important that we use technology to meet up like this and talk like this, either together or in a group, but it's also important that ultimately, I believe, that we find a community that we surround ourselves with. Imagine if there were, 50 other people that were not clones of you, but that had a similar worldview to you, and they all lived around you, like blocks of them, like a village, like huts and homes. Like, you could walk down there and there's one group, and then you could walk over here and there's another. And every Saturday you get together and have this drumming circle. Kids are running around, dancing and singing and, twirling around. Flower children, you're like, holy shit, like what did we do here? We created, something that's not the toxic, disgusting thing that most of America is. We made something else, and that we get to live in that every day now. Like my wife and I, we have this little space between us that we've created. And people walk into our home, they come in. That couch, by the way, is where I see some clients for my work, and they'll sit down and look around and they go, wow, your house is really peaceful. I imagine what it's like. I don't know what it's like to be in your house, but obviously it's not that peaceful.
Right, because they're experiencing the peace.
Seeing a huge difference. So you're like, wow, like this is possible. So, but this is just her and I. And once we step out of here, it's a different world, right? So I think that, we have to believe that there's a possibility that we could grow communities of us. I think about Jesus, remember or Buddha. They created communities around themselves of like-minded thinkers, and then they went out and addressed the public, but they came back into their supportive community because of how exhausting and threatening and difficult that was. They didn't just live alone in the woods by themselves.
No, you couldn't. You couldn't. If one entity
that would have been really hard.
Too much to be
your speaker.
No, I think you might have lost your Bluetooth on your.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you. Can you hear me?
Oh, I think that's what happened. My headset died, and then I had mute set on my computer so that I couldn't hear you through the regular speaker. So you were probably talking, and I was talking over you.
No,
if that happened, I'm really sorry.
No, not at all. It didn't. I actually recognized there was a point in time when I think I heard it click off, and because the sound changed, and you were silent for a minute, but you were still talking, and then it came back on. The sound had changed. So, yeah, I think it's all good though. I don't think it affected anything on a
sorry.
Totally all good, man.
This thing ran out of battery.
Yeah.
Not bad.
All good, man. All good. Yeah, but I mean, I just think we're in a place, Ken, that we've definitely, I think we're being awoken to what we've missed the mark on as an entire human race. And we're in the process now. And like people like yourself and myself and other people that we know are trying to do what you're saying is be that lighthouse on the shore and lead a life of example. It is very difficult right now, I feel, because certain people see it and they still think it's a very hippie-ish way to live, I guess is the only word I can think of. But
we're flower children.
Flower child. Like you're just trying to be like, super nice and happy about everything. Hippy dippy. But I've discovered, and I think once people start realizing that, like, when you live that way, when you show that kind of appreciation and happiness for the littlest things like your planet, life has a tendency to just get a little bit better without having to do much. So the only benefit I think we've gained from this entire thing of everybody being told to stay home is that I think a lot of people for the first time in their lives were able to slow down and start to think about some of the things that you and I are thinking about. They may not have leaped into the full belief systems and understandings that we have, but I think for the first time ever, people have started to slow down and start going and do a little bit of this. Not everybody, but I think that there is more people scratching their head now than there were before. And I'm hoping that scratching of the head turns into people coming to ask questions to people like you and I. And I'm not trying to like bump us up and think that we're like better or different than anybody else. All we've done is that we've made a choice to not just follow.
Drink the Kool-Aid.
Yeah, like we've made that choice. Like, okay, I see the Kool-Aid there. I see it, but I'm not really going to drink. I don't want to drink it. I don't want to drink it right now. I'd like to dive in deeper and find out what you made that Kool-Aid with before I go ahead and drink
it. Or why you made it.
Or why you made it.
Like, what are you trying to hide? Like, you want to see the truth, basically, is what it is. And
I don't want to take your surface level explanation to me. And maybe that's a gift and a curse. I've discovered that in my life, I must know via my own research. So someone can tell me, but 9 times out of 10, even if they tell me, I'm usually going to go look on my own still too. And
that's what that guy behind you recommended, right? That was one of his teachings that if you find the Buddha on the road, kill it. Don't worship me.
Yes, because if it's outside of you, you've immediately ripped yourself away from what we've been gifted as. I have a 2-year-old daughter. She has like almost zero ego. It's beginning to develop because she's a child, and I'm watching her egoic behavior starting to develop because that's what we are as humans. We end up developing that. But I'm very fortunate to have witnessed my own ego in its years of not being trained by me. It's just like being like sitting there being open. So I'm witnessing that the fact that we can train this ego. And there was a time when it didn't exist. There was a time when we were just very free and we were just very in touch. And I don't think that is gone from all of us. I just think that it's a cultivation process. And I think that people like yourself and I, if we can show people that you can go out there and cultivate your life that you used to have, that time when you had instinct and you had intuition and you had the desire to know real truth. You ask any kid, any kid that's ever asked you a question, they ask you the question, you give them the answer. What's the next thing they do? Well, why? And then you give them another answer and they go, well, why? And another answer and they go, well, why? And it's because they're not comfortable with just taking the surface. I think as adults, we get to a place of just going, okay, that sounds good. I don't want to have to deal with this.
Good. Imagine that's also another artifice is to buy the story that children are ignorant and they're just pictures to be filled,
and that we can't learn anything from them. They're to be seen and not heard, and they're to follow us. Like, what if we flipped that over and said that children are amazing cosmic beings that are actually more directly in touch with the stardust and the spirit, and that we can learn from them by observing them and by asking them questions. We can learn from them how to be more spiritually alive and free the way we used to be, you know, and preserve that incredible, instead of forcing them to sit the fuck down in rows when they're 3 or 4 years old and put masks on their faces and separate them with plexiglass and make them sit in those fucking chairs for 7 hours a day, memorizing inane information like all the dates of all the wars between, you know, the death of Jesus to the present, like, or calculus. We actually created holistic learning environments for them where they could interact and play and create projects. I mean, Montessori, basically.
Yeah, yeah, and there's a place out in Costa Rica. There's a whole, I don't know if you've seen the new Zac Efron documentary on Netflix, which I can't believe. I'm actually really nice to see that somebody of his caliber is creating a documentary that was like this. But he went out with a guy who created, I believe it's Herbalife. I think it's his company that he created. But he went out and he traveled the world, and they went to all these different places, showing how people are like being regenerative, like using this synergistic relationship with the planet. And one place they went to is Costa Rica, and there was an entire community of people that live like we've talked about throughout this whole podcast. Wow. And what impressed me the most was the schooling. Their school is kids, no age separations. They look at the kid, they ask the kids what it is that they like to do, and they say they exploit their talents, and they allow them to take their talents and the things that innately come up for them that
and they build it around their interests.
And
they force them down a tube.
Bingo. And then they allow, and there's no, like I said, there's no age restrictions. So if you're a 9-year-old kid and you like to do math or you like to build things, and then there's a 15-year-old kid too that also likes to do that, they put you in the same class with that. Yeah. And that's
how it used to be. That
bingo.
Was primitive. That was primitive peoples.
Yes.
If you had a talent in music, you became the musician. If you had a talent in sewing and an interest in that, you became the sewer. If you had a talent in hunting, you became the hunter. They didn't try to make a hunter into a stitcher or a stitcher into a hunter. They saw that you had a talent and they said, wow, they were born with this talent. It must be, you know.
It must be that. That's their soul.
Yeah, and imagine what a great race we could have if we used people's talents that they were born with and let them do those things and promoted that instead of forcing them into cubicles.
And there'd be so much less attention deficit disorder. Yeah, all the attention deficit disorder diagnosis would probably be gone, because most of those kids were just kids that they didn't have the capability. They thought they were excited about building and creating and making and doing and being.
They were more kinesthetic learners rather than, say,
bingo.
Visual learners who thrived on reading or
right.
maybe listening, you know.
Right.
I work with a lot of adult ADHD, adult folks that were diagnosed with that. And I find most of them are kinesthetic learners that like to be fully immersed in the learning situation and use their bodies more than they do their minds. And they get frustrated when they have to sit for long periods of time and read, you know. And that's not a disability.
Right.
Just a disability through the eyes of, again, another slant that this is what we want you to be able to do. So if you're not as good at that, we're going to say you have a disability, because then it forwards our agenda.
The industrial complex.
And who wants to have a disability? So you're going to hurry. The ones that don't have that are going to hurry up and work harder to obey, so they don't get labeled with that disability.
That's very true.
And the ones who don't, you know, and they're going to be sort of instead of finding their power and manifesting it, they're going to be living in this sort of sense of that they're less than or not good enough or weak. And their self-esteem and their confidence is going to go down, and then they're not going to manifest because they don't want them to. Because the greatest leaders sometimes are those, not the ones who sit quietly in rows and obey, but the ones who want to break out. the ones
Speak
who
out.
have disciplinary problems and who question the teacher. Those are the ones that get in the principal's office and get suspended from school and wind up not graduating or whatever. A lot of them are brilliant and they're great leaders. But again, they challenge the status quo
in the system.
So they're weakened by being labeled as miscreants, juvenile delinquents,
overactive.
I saw you pointing toward yourself there.
Yeah, because I was like that. I actually can distinctly remember a time when I had a teacher in one of my science classes and I was questioning something because it didn't make sense to me. I don't remember the actual context, but I was questioning it, and the teacher was upset with me for questioning it. And
I had the same experience.
Yeah, she was very upset with me for questioning it. And then I got to a place where I realized that I had learned something that she was not teaching me. Correct. And that I had discovered a truth. So I actually had asked her if she could initial my paperwork because I had written the answer down, and we had like a coercion in class. And I, at a point, made her realize that what I was saying was true. And she didn't necessarily agree with it by saying it, but I noticed through her body language that she was like, oh no, like I was, that
maybe
it was
saying something I don't even know yet.
Right. So I asked her to initial the where I'd written the answer so she would remember it when she was correcting the paper. And I got sent down to the principal's office for being insubordinate, how I was questioning, and I got in a lot of trouble. And it's because the teacher, I questioned her authority, and I questioned her, what her presumed knowledge was. And I was able to dig into my own mind and sit there and think about what she was saying. I was like, that doesn't make sense.
Right.
My intuition is telling me that is wrong, and I'm going to voice it. I did. And not for nothing, but that moment actually was one of the moments that began tamping down my ability to evoke that, because it was such a back and forth coercion with her that wasn't comfortable, that eventually I started going, well, maybe if I have one of these moments again, I'll just keep it.
Better just say nothing.
Yeah, I'll just keep it to myself. And I did that for years. And then eventually now I'm in a place now where I'm like, I realized how the detriments that put on me. It made me become someone that I wasn't. And when you don't speak your truth for a very, very, very long time, it breeds disease and discomfort inside your body. And we talked about this on our last podcast, is that, when you don't be you, your body shows it, and it does things to you. So
yeah.
Yeah, man.
Well, I wonder if there's any issues around the throat chakra, tension in the shoulders and neck, and infections in the throat. Or
I used to get strep throat a lot when I was a little kid, a lot. And it's funny because as an adult, I haven't gotten it in a lot of years, and it's because I speak my truth now. I'm not as afraid as I was, but when I was young, and this is a long story, honestly, I could go through forever, but I mean, we've gone through a lot of time anyway. But really, when I was young, I was made fun of a lot, and I ended up tamping down myself because of the level of bullying that I got. And it's funny that I look back now, to your point, like saying things to the throat, there was a lot of things that I restricted myself from saying and doing. And as a young child, like I can remember getting strep throat like an exorbitant amount of times, like just like a stupid amount of times, multiple times in a year. And it probably had a lot to do with the fact that I was not expressing my true self. And a lot of it was vocally. I would just keep my mouth shut. I wasn't going to say how I actually felt because I knew I'd get made fun of for it. So why would I going to say it? I'll just go along with the crowd and be like everybody else. And that eventually bred into what got me started on this whole journey. I got very riddled with anxiety to the point where I couldn't even go inside a store, couldn't talk to family members that I've been in my family my whole life. And I would just break out into full body sweats, not be able to talk. Like my voice would shake so bad because I was so riddled with anxiety. And after going through this personal development journey over all these years, I've realized that a lot of that had to do with the fact that I stopped being my authentic self. Like I just turned it off to be like everybody else so I could quote unquote fit in and feel normal. And the more I tried to do that, my body showed me like, dude, you got to stop doing this, man. Cause I'm going to keep breaking you down until you realize that this is not how you're supposed to be living. Go back to your authentic self and you'll be safe. And that's what I started to do. It's wild.
Bless you for being able to find your truth. And it shows that you have vibrant health now. And that's amazing. One thought I had, so many thoughts I had when you were talking about your story. One is, you look around at Americans, and the vast majority of them, like, just go to Walmart for, your grocery shopping, and you're just surrounded by, I don't know what you want to call them, basically zombies. They're like shells of who they used to be. There's encasement after encasement of fat and sick and toxicity all wrapped around the being that they once were. And they're hidden from their own selves, and it's almost like everything you say to them, only a whisper of it can even get in, because it has to travel down this huge tunnel where their essential self is hiding inside. It doesn't even believe what you're saying. It wants to, but it's so afraid, and so, you're not alone. The whole country is become zombified. Not every person.
No, but I know what you mean.
It's because it takes a lot of courage to do what you did, to break out and to free yourself, to open your fifth chakra, and let your energy, flow through your body and become healthy and whole. It's a huge journey. It's not something that, you told the story in 2 minutes, but it was a 30-year journey, right? It was definitely not an easy or short or painless experience.
No, not at all.
And it's easy to look back now and say, yeah, that's all the shit I like in the Shawshank Redemption. I crawl through that tunnel of shit. And then you're like, now I have a great life. But wait a minute, they never filmed the part about when he was on his hands and knees crawling through the tunnel of shit. I would have liked to have seen that part, because that's real life sometimes.
It is.
I was a 5-year-old who had missed a third of kindergarten because I had so many throat infections. Oh. And eventually my parents and my doctor had the brilliant idea that they should just remove my tonsils and my adenoids from my body and the problem would go away. Ironically, I think the problem was there because, number one, both of my parents smoked. And number two, there was a lot of emotional repression in the home. You were physically disciplined if you ever spoke out against the authority.
Yep.
And that, of course, was true in school, and it was true in church, and it was true in the home. So it was reinforced. The only time you could be your real self was when you were outdoors playing with your friends. And even then, you had social confines and rules.
Yes.
Because if the bigger kids didn't like you or what you were doing or saying, you got the crap beat out of you, or you got
that was me.
You got with dirt balled in the head or whatever. So miraculously, I was able to then somehow get through 12 years of school without missing a single day. I had perfect attendance for 12 straight years.
Holy shit.
Which was not recognized by my community, but I kept all the certificates. I've got them all to prove them. And I also was one who, of the crew of really smart kids that were at the top of the class, I was the rebel who always got into it. I got into it with teachers. I got into it with bullies and what we used to call burnouts and potheads, people that were sort of on the outer edge of. They certainly weren't academically inclined, and they were anyway. They were into things that my group wasn't into. But we would get into it. I got in fights. It was crazy. Like the salutatorian of the school getting in a fist fight in the hallway. Where do you ever hear that? Like, that doesn't normally happen.
No, it's usually like total opposite,
I went to college and it continued. I got into it with professors. I got into it with administrators. I get into it with employers years later. And I had to realize that, and it's funny because whenever I get sick, I don't almost ever get sick, but whenever sickness begins to come to me, 99% of the time, I feel it in my throat. There's an irritation and a weakness in my throat. So like in cold weather, I always have to keep my throat and upper chest covered with a scarf. A jacket's not enough.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is a weak place. Well, probably because some of my organs here were cut out, right? There was damage done. But it's it's weird. It worked in a way because the disease couldn't accumulate here like it was, but on the other hand, it couldn't also enter and clear through the lymphatic system the way it should. So I've always wondered if there's some impairment there now that I have to sort of live with. I can't put my tonsils back in. They're there for a reason. But no, I've also struggled again with throat chakra issues. And the first time, like 2 years ago, when I first started this business full time, I had to make some videos to put on my website, and I couldn't do it. Like I remember it took me months to get it done because I would make a video and I would watch it and I'd be like, that's horrible. I can't stand the way that I'm speaking. I can't stand the sound of my voice. I'm not saying the right words, and I delete it and start over again, and nothing was ever right. And I realized that this has a lot to do with fifth chakra issues, you know. Not only
that's very interesting, Ken, because I do that same thing.
Allow yourself to speak the truth and accept it and not reject it or criticize it or make fun of it, you know.
I do that same thing, Ken. It's so weird, man. I do the same thing with my podcast. I will do the recordings of the intros and the outros, and there are times where I will record what seems like hundreds of them before I finally pick the one where I'm like, you know what, that's the good one. And it's interesting to say that to know that you experience those same kind of things that I experience, and that we both have that over analytical mind when it comes to watching ourselves speak.
Self-criticism,
just like super, especially when I'm speaking. And if I'm not, like, if I don't articulate things, because I listen back to every one of these podcasts, there are times when I'm like, I can't fix that.
I said that.
Yeah, and I can't fix it now. It's like it's in there.
The way I said that.
Yeah.
My eyes keep opening too wide, or I touched my nose when I was speaking, you know, like this. Oh my God, I can't use that.
Yeah, but it's all really just me thinking these things. It has no real creed. Like somebody else might not even notice that. And it's happened before where there have been times where like I'll send Kyle something that I'm like beating myself up on. Like, dude, listen to this. Does it suck as bad as I think it does? And he'll be like, dude, that was the best thing that you've said in so long. Oh my God, so good. And I'll be like, what? For the past 25 minutes, I've been bashing the crap out of myself thinking that this is the worst thing that I've ever created. And now you're telling me it's one of the best? It's just weird how we work as humans. It really is.
Because if you think about it, those are probably going to be the moments where you're going the furthest out on the limb, where you're being the most creative and where you're using the most originality and where you're not just relying on some stock wisdom that most people would just agree with. You're taking a chance, in other words.
Yes.
And then you're sort of anxious about that because it's like, well, I don't know if it's true, or I don't know if people are going to agree with it or think I'm a quack job, or, you know, I don't have a lot of research or support that I could cite to. I just feel that it is true, and so so you're a little bit more subconsciously afraid that position is going to be attacked or rejected or whatever. But actually, it winds up being like the breakthrough thought that needed to be said that a lot of people haven't had, and they're like, "Holy shit, I never saw it that way. That's amazing. Thank you for that." And you're like, "Really?"
You're like, "Whoa, okay, cool." Because I wasn't going to say it. I'm glad I did. You know?
Yeah. Well, that, you know, believe it or not, the reason that we're talking is because, you know, of a group that was founded by a person that discovered one of my meditations that I never thought was going to be that successful. I didn't think it was not going to be successful, but I couldn't imagine that hundreds, you know, 100 and whatever, 30.
Yeah, it's a lot of people
watched it, and that a group would have been started that's using, you know, my work, and like I could have never, like I didn't have the self-esteem, you know. Even though I knew what I was doing was valuable to me,
right?
I didn't realize that it would strike a chord and that it would be valuable to others the way it has been. And sometimes you discover your gifts because other people share with you what a profound impact you had on them and how, you know what I mean? Like you don't realize that you have, and the irony is, this is going to come off, I don't know how you're going to react to this, but of all the skills that I have developed, the one that seems to have, for whatever reason, the most impact on people is my voice. It's my fucking voice.
And it's the one that you think is the word that you don't like about you.
The one that I constantly criticize and can't stand the sound of it, and it's not perfect. And then I record it, and people are like, "Oh my God, your voice is so amazing. It's so calming. It's so grounding." Like my clients come in and say, "I just love your voice. Can we do another guided meditation? It makes me feel so calm. I just want to listen to your voice." I'm like, "What? You know what?"
That's so wild, man. Like, why does that happen to us? See, like that's the perplexing stuff for me as human beings, man. That's the stuff that makes my head go.
That's the shadow stuff. Wow. you know?
Well, Ken, dude, we covered, like, I think some awesome stuff in this particular episode. I'm stoked that we talked about the things that we talked about, because I think it's extraordinarily relevant. It's what we need to be discussing right now. I think it's like the Indians in the teepee. We're sitting down and we're going through a barrage of facts and assumptions and feelings and all sorts of stuff, and really just putting it out here and saying, well, look at all of this instead of just not looking at it. And because I think that the two of us are doing something like that, we may be opening doors for people to be able to dive deeper into thinking for themselves. So I think this is really, really, really awesome. Really, really, really awesome.
Well, I've enjoyed it as well. Yeah. I've always enjoyed our deep dives.
Yeah,
and I feel like, and one of the intentions today, way back, was let's talk about manifesting, which we haven't really talked about.
I know. I noticed that.
That could be that we get to that in the third chapter.
Yeah, and I'm in with that.
But I mean, we have talked a lot today about the dark side, and the dark side of politics, and the dark side of the matrix, and the dark side of the human psyche, which is, again, the words you used were perfect. You said it was something like absolutely relevant or totally relevant. Like it's needed right now to talk about the dark side. People need to bring their dark into light. I completely agree with you. They need to take a good big old sniff of their dirty underwear and be like, holy, believe it, like I have to change these now.
Yeah.
I can't tolerate this any longer.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
I can see the smell coming up.
My wife literally took a pair of my underwear last week that were ripped all along the side, and she took them away and she threw them in the garbage. And I saw them in the garbage and I felt this emotional loss. I was like, oh, I've been wearing those for years.
Those are my favorite. Yeah.
And I looked at them and the rip was like 4 inches long.
It's not even a functioning pair of underwear.
Why was I wearing those? She's absolutely right. It's ridiculous that I wear ripped underwear. You know?
Oh man, that's funny. But like, yeah, you don't know until you see it, until
they're
somebody
soft,
brings it.
They're comfortable. They've been my best friends for years. I just don't easily want to kick them to the curb, but it's time.
It's time.
It's really time.
It's time, man. It is time.
That being said, I just want to leave people who may be watching this, who knows how many lost souls find themselves watching this or listening to this, is like there is a way out of all of this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and us light bearers, even though we suffer in the sense of watching a lot of people suffer, people that we love and care about, that, you know, like our families, our coworkers, our friends, our neighbors, we also enjoy a certain quality of life that the most of humanity don't enjoy. We've been able to more fully harness the powers of manifestation and live a life in greater harmony with the universe. It's not a perfect life. We continue to evolve, like everyone who's trying to evolve, because some people just don't, because they don't try, which is a large chunk of humanity, unfortunately. But there is a way out. There is a path forward into greater happiness, greater freedom, greater harmony with nature, greater health, physically, mentally, and spiritually. And we didn't talk much about that today, but you and I are on that path, as you can see by our physical health manifesting and our mental health manifesting in our conversation, our spiritual health. But I'd like to talk more in the future with you about, you know, what that path is, how you get on that path, how you stay on that path, and what that sort of future could look like. We talked just briefly about it today.
Yeah.
Moving to Costa Rica. There are places like Costa Rica, like Hawaii, that are sort of these spiritual meccas for people like us who have broken through and seen things that other people haven't seen. And then we wind up going there to be those kinds of communities and surrounded by those kinds of people. And I'd love to talk more, share more information about those kinds of communities and what's going on there. And not only physically talk about communities like that, but like what the spiritual journey is for someone who is, you know, wrestling with your dark side is a big part of the spiritual journey, and it's a hugely important one, but it's also important to manifest the positive in terms of the direction that you're going. You don't want to live in La La Land where you're ignoring the shadow side and only focusing. There's a lot of people that are doing what I call spiritual bypassing.
Yes.
I don't call it that. That's an actual thing.
I've heard of this.
In spiritual psychotherapy, where they're bypassing their shadow self and only allow themselves to focus on the positive and on the affirmations that they want, et cetera, et cetera. And there's roots of that in Buddhism, even the Golden Rule, you know, in Christianity, where it's like, oh, you have to focus on the positive to get where you're going. Yes, you do. And yes, you should.
Right.
And yet the shadow side exists, and you have to process that sometimes. That's what your meditation is about too.
Yes.
It could be about is processing the dark side and all that and working through all that. But you have to, you're you know, it's like a 2-step forward, 1 step back. It's like a shuffle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Forward,
Yes.
But then you're consolidating, coming back, and like, okay, what's going on here?
It's just like a science experiment. You go, you run the experiment, you come back and you go through the data.
Analyze the results.
Yeah.
So, you know, but there is a process to that manifesting. And I'd love to talk. Let's make round 3.
Yeah, we're going to do round 3.
Round 3.
Solely manifesting on round 3.
Process.
Yeah, I agree. So on round 3, we'll do solely manifesting and speaking to that, because honestly, I think it would be a good one to do on number 3, because I think what we've done is we've covered what needs to be taken care of before you get to a place where you can begin to start the manifestation process. I think what we've discussed in our past 2 episodes is a lot of what it takes to get the slate, like the plate and the slate clean, to get to a place of like, okay, now we can start understanding how to manifest now. So we've done now we're ready for the next step. So
we just did an Empire Strikes Back.
Yes.
We started with A New Hope, and then we're now at Empire Strikes Back. We just talked about now we're going to go to, what is it? The Return of the Jedi.
Yes.
You know, in round 3.
Yeah, and that's what it's all about, man. And I think honestly, Ken, that's what's so awesome about talking to you, man, is that we can do this and we can actually put pins in things and realize that what we're doing is we're not just having one conversation, we're like building a conversation from many pieces and kind of creating a roadmap. So anytime that you're down to talk, I'm down to listen, and I'm down to be coerced, because this was a great conversation today. Like,
it is. I'm loving it. I was just talking to my wife recently about how, you know, it's good to really have support. And I'm starting to feel, as a therapist, this is a really challenging time. I don't know what just happened to my light here, but I'm liking this weird glow. The sun just shifted, and I'm surrounded by like purples and blues right now. But
it's just this nice bright light in purple and blue behind you. You got a very God look to you.
Just gonna absorb back into it and just absorb into the light. You know? But it's a hard time to be a therapist, because, you know, people are coming in with so much heaviness. It's not just their childhood traumas and their personal, you know, issues that we normally would deal with, but society is crumbling around them, and people they know are dying, and or losing their businesses, or they're out of work, and you know what I mean. There's a lot of it's just so heavy, and even more than ever, people that are doing healing work, that are doing light work, they need to reach out to each other, man, and make these kinds of connections to get through this together, right? Because this is like the most uplifting conversation I've had in probably months.
I love that. So yes.
I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate you opening the door, being a source, you know, to generate. Sometimes people need a nudge, you know, like it's like, oh, well, I'm so busy, I got so much going on, but here you are coming in and saying, hey, let's reserve some time to have a meaningful conversation and share that with people. My wife's telling me all the time, you need to record your ideas, you need to be, you know, video. I'm like, I'll get to it. As soon as I pay off my debt, as soon as I do this, as soon as I do that, I'll have more time. But you're out there saying, no, let's not wait 3 more years or 4 more years. Let's do it right now. Let's get it on camera. Let's talk about this shit, because it's necessary. And I thank you for rounding me up and getting me out here and sharing, not just me, but sharing your wonderful ideas as well. Because I'm learning from you as well. You know, like you said, it's a conversation.
Yeah, man. Thank you, Ken. Thank you. And I appreciate that on levels that I couldn't even really put into words, because I have a lot of respect for you and what you do. So to have you tell me that you're learning from me is something that I will never forget that. It's a very, I'm going to hold that compliment close to my heart for a very long time.
Wow.
I'm very grateful for that, man. And I'm grateful for I'm grateful to be able to share this kind of understanding with you, and for us to be able to have this kind of conversation, because it takes that, like what we talked about earlier, that alone feeling and that feeling of like, whoa, am I the only one? It literally throws it out the door. And like you said, uplifting, like I just feel like, yeah. So I'm not the only one. Like, yeah, okay, cool. There's somebody else out there like putting this energy out into the world. It's not just me. So I'm always and forever grateful for the time that you take to come out and talk to me and share your wealth of knowledge and understanding with the audience, because it's a gift and it's a privilege and an honor. So I'm very grateful for you, Ken. Thank you so much, man.
Wow.
Thank you.
Well, you know, one thing I've learned too is one of the reasons why you need to preserve yourself well, you know, with health, is that the older you get, the wiser you get. If you're processing life in a healthy way. I mean, not everybody gets wiser when they get old. Some people get decrepit and they get dementia and they die. They're not taking good care of themselves. If you take good care of yourselves, it's one way of beating the matrix, is that the older you get, imagine how much knowledge we'll have in 20, 30, 40 more years if we're still here. And the kinds of conversations that Joe and I can have, like in the year 2055, you know what I mean? Like, well,
whoa.
You know, the kind of wisdom we'll be able to share, right? So, like,
oh my goodness.
That's another reason they want us to die at 65. They want you to finish your work, and then basically, right when you've got the freedom and the time to kind of dive in and start exploring the dark web and talking about what's really happening and sharing your life experience, you feel over. You're gone. But like, no, let's beat the system by living 50 years beyond that and teaching to the world for 50 years, living off their dollar.
Yes.
For the check. And now I can sit back and retire in Costa Rica and make videos all damn day long and send them out every single day to the whole world, to the internet. You know, like, that's my goal.
Yes, man. Yes.
So, like, this is like really important because it's helping us, you know, stay on that path and and realize the importance of what we're doing and why we're doing it, and talk more about, again, hopefully in round 3 we can talk more about what is that lifestyle and what is that mentality and that mindset, and how do you get on that path and stay on that path and all the parts of that. So
100%. Ken, thank you so much, man. I hope you have just a phenomenal day. I hope your mom continues to heal. I hope I'm looking forward already to our next conversation, and I hope that you can continue to be a lighthouse on the shore for people in your community, and I'll do it over on my end here. And as long as all of our lighthouse community continues to keep casting that big wave of light across the ocean, I think we'll start attracting those who are looking for that light, and we'll start helping more and more people, you know, wake up to what could be the truth.
Well, your light's definitely reaching all the way down here to North Carolina, so that's at least 1,000 miles minimal.
Oh, that's
but I know
awesome.
It's going wider than that.
Yeah, I've actually been very fortunate. I have a listener in Australia that is
amazing.
Yeah, it's really amazing to even say that. So that's phenomenal. Yeah, Ken, thank you so much, man. Thank you for everything that you do. I cannot wait till the round 3. So we'll make it happen sooner than later.
We'll schedule it soon.
Yes, definitely. Ken, thank you so much, brother. Have a beautiful day, and we'll talk to you soon, man.
You too.
See you, brother.
Thank you all so much for joining me on another episode of the Longer Life Podcast. I am super grateful that you made it to the end. It was a long one, and I hope it got you fired up at times and made you think at times, and I don't know, it just was really cathartic for Ken and I to have this conversation. And originally I was unsure whether or not I was even going to throw the whole thing out there, just because it is so much, but I decided to just let it fly. You know, I did take one thing out. Ken at the end had said to me, he goes, you know what, man, you just might as well throw the whole thing out there. So I did, you know, I just hope you guys got value out of it, is in any way, shape, or form that you may have had the ability to do so. We did talk about a lot of stuff. Some of the stuff was a little esoteric, maybe a little bit like you heard in the episode. Ken and I don't like to say it, but you know, conspiracy theory, that's not the word we like to use. I like to say it's the truth seeking. It's a digging deeper into what could possibly be, and being scientific about it, looking at data on a spreadsheet and making my conclusion due to that data. So Yeah, I appreciate the hell out of you guys. Like so much, especially if you are still here listening to me right this moment, because like I said, this is long. If you'd like to donate, please go check out that link. That would help me and my family out so greatly. I can't even begin to describe to you. It'll also provide me with the ability to be able to make this show better for you. And that's ultimately what I'd love to do, is to make this show more exciting, more valuable, and more interactive with you. So if you'd like to do that, please go check out the link. I'm sorry that my throat is so hoarse lately. Every time I do these intros and outros, I'm like clearing my throat. I apologize. I hope you guys still love me. Anyway, I'm super stoked to give you guys another episode next week. I can promise that one will not be as long because it's already recorded. So, see you guys next week. Have an awesome week, and I love you all so much. Peace out.